In this tutorial, we're going to model this paper bag using a polygon cube. I've started out by introducing the bag template in two views, a side view and front view. And I'm going to introduce a polygon cube. I'll go to Create, Polygon Primitives, Cube, and I'll go to an orthographic view, and I'll drag the footprint for the front of the bag, and then I'll go to my perspective view, and I'll start to introduce the width. Okay, so now I've got the basic dimensions of the bag. Now that I have the basic dimensions, I don't need the template anymore. The bag is open on top, so I'll right click and I'll choose face, and I'll delete the top face. I'll return to my object mode. Next, I'm going to delete by type history, and I'm going to go to modify freeze transforms. That will assure me that the UV map that I plot using automatic mapping will be proportional to the faces of this cube. I'll right click and assign a new material, AI Standard Surface. I'll go to my texture node. I'll introduce the default checkerboard pattern, and if I don't see it, I would hit 6 on the keyboard. With the object mode selected, I'll go to UVs and click on automatic mapping. I'll deselect, go to my object mode, select my geometry, and I'll go to my UV texture editor. And in my editor now I can see the checkerboard pattern is perfectly square. I can turn it off. And to further have better visibility in my UV map, I'm going to go to View and I'll choose Shaded. Now I'm going to sew them together. I'll right click and choose Edge, and I'll start by selecting a side edge. And I'll go to Cut and Sew, and I'll choose Move and Sew. And I'll do that for the front and side panels. Cut and Sew, Move and Sew. Or hit G on the keyboard, and that repeats the function that you used previously. So I'm going to go to UV shells. I'll select the shell. I'm just going to move it over here like so for a moment. I'll right click, go to Edge again, and I'll just add the bottom of the bag to one of the wider surfaces. Again, Move and Sew. UV shell. I'll put it into the center of the quadrant with the checkerboard and scale it to fit. Now I've got it fit within the context of the UV map that will go into Photoshop. I'm going to go to my geometry and choose Object Mode and reselect it. We're going to use the Edge Loop tool now to refine this a little bit. I'll hit 5 on the keyboard so the checkerboard isn't a distraction. And I'm going to go to Mesh Tools, and I'm going to use the Insert Edge Loop. Now, if you have it on your shelf, it would appear as a box cut in 4s with an orange line through it. If you need to add it to your shelf, you can hold Command-Shift, Mesh Tools, and click on Insert Edge Loop. I'll split it lengthwise. I'm going to put the ghost on so we can see through the geometry to our paths. I'll go to my side view of the geometry. I'll hit W on the keyboard and center that. I'm going to put another slice with the Insert Edge Loop down towards the bottom. That's going to allow me to put in the edges that will allow us to put the creases on either side of the bag itself. In order to do that, I'm going to use the toolkit. The toolkit is located in the upper right hand corner of the user interface. It appears as if it's a little cube with a hammer on it. I'll click on that and the modeling toolkit will appear. I'm going to use a tool that looks like the number 11 X-Acto knife blade, multi-cut. I'll click on the multi-cut and I'll click in here on the corner there and over there. You can actually see where this is going and how we'll crease this to look like a pleated paper bag. We'll go to the other side and do the same. So essentially that edge loop allowed us to keep it pretty symmetrical as far as this design goes. I'll hit return, hit W to go back to my move tool. Now we're going to add a few more edge loops just so we can get a little bit more shape to this bag. Once again, I'll click on the edge loop and I'll start to cut this up, and I'm going to go to the front view here. Once again, I'll put on the ghost and I'll start to cut this up somewhat evenly, just dragging a few more lines in. And this is something that you could add more to if you wanted, depending on how many poly faces your model could tolerate, depending on the actual place it was going to be. If it was a game environment, we would be very, very cautious about adding a lot of extra edge loops. But if it's for an illustration or an animation, we could add more, but that will serve our purpose pretty well. I'll go back to my object mode, and now we've got the makings of our bag. Now there's one other thing I want to do before I go into Photoshop and get my texture. And I want to bevel the edges so it looks like folded paper. So I'll right click and I'll choose edge, and I'll start to select these edges, and I'm double clicking between a series of edges to select the whole thing. And I'm going to use the Bevel Plus tool. So I'd go to Edit Mesh, and I would go to Bevel, and I'm going to go to the attributes for it. I'm going to set the width for 0.05, and I'm going to keep the segments down at 2. Now, this is something that's also very subjective depending on how much of a crease you want there. And I'll hit apply, and I can see it's starting to pleat that just enough so it looks like it is a soft edge of a folded piece of paper. I'll select this edge at the top, double click the one at the bottom, and I'll hit apply, and I'll do the same here. I'm just going around and adding it to all of them. And I'll do it on the bottom edge as well. Once I have all the pleats in, I'll hit 6 on the keyboard. I'll right click and go back to my object mode. And I'll take the ghost off for a moment. And now we've got our basic shape. Now we'll generate our UV map and then go into Photoshop. With the geometry selected in the object mode, I'll click on the UV editor, and I'll go to Image, and I'll choose UV Snapshot, and I'll browse to my folder, set the image format for PNG, and then the size that you might want for this. Apply and close, and now we'll go into Photoshop. Now once again, this is very subjective because you'll be using your own design, but you can see now that I've got my UV map laid out that relates to the model itself, and I've put some graphics on this. I'm going to save this out as a JPEG at this point, and then once I do, I'll go back into Maya and we'll add it to our geometry. Back in Maya, I'm going to the texture node, and I could right click and choose material attribute. I'll right click on the word color under the base tab and choose break connection, and then I'll follow the color tab out to the right with the checkerboard and go to File, Image Name, and I'll select my design. Now all I need to do is to refine this a bit so it looks a little bit more believable. So I'll select it, and I may hit 5 on the keyboard. I'll right click, and I'm going to choose Edge, and I'm going to go here now, and I'm going to shift select both sides down to where the triangle piece appears. And then with my move tool, I'll pull them in to crease it. So if we were to go back to 6 on the keyboard, take off our ghost, you can see we're starting to get the shape we want. Now at this point, it's really very subjective on how much you want this to look like the bag is perhaps relaxed. The sample that I showed when we first started is a little cartoonish. So if I was to turn that back on again, we can see that it's a bit exaggerated in the design. And I accomplished all this by right-clicking, choosing Edge, and I'll select these 2 edges down here perhaps. Let's hit 5. And then I'm going to use soft select. So I'm going to B on the keyboard, and I can see there's a little too much influence right here. So I'll double click on the move tool, and I'll open up soft select, and I'll drop the number down. And all this again is very subjective on how you want to edit this. Or maybe I'll make it a little higher. You can see I can start to shape this if I choose. I'll come over to the other side and I'll do the same. Now, what I could have done if I wanted it symmetrical is I would probably take the B off for a moment. It's easier to select these edges without the soft select on. I'll select the other side as well. Now when I get my move tool and I put the soft select on, I can kind of pucker those both on either side. So at this point, the modeling process gets very, very specific to your actual needs. I'll just do a little bit more. Maybe I'll taper up here a little bit. Once again, taking the soft select off so that I can select those edges a little bit easier holding the shift key. I find very often if you hit 4 on the keyboard, you can make sure that you are precise in selecting just the faces you want. You can see I over-selected. I selected these down here, so I'll shift select them out of the mix, as well as down here. And now I'll taper the top a bit. Let's hit the soft select. There we go. Alright, now there's one other thing that you'll want to do no matter how over the top or cartoonish or exaggerated your bag would want to be. You'll notice that the creases on the side of this model are very pronounced. And that was something that you would do no matter what the bag characteristics are. So I'll select my geometry and I'll go to Edge and I'll shift select through here. I'll hold down the space bar and I'm going to go to Mesh Display and I'm going to choose Harden. And when I deselect, you'll see that it's increased that crease on the side. I'm going to do the same down here and then I'll do the same on the other side. Right click, Edge, select, I'll hit G, select this one, hit G, and I would go over and do the same thing on this side. And I'll go back to my object mode. And I'll bring up my orbital render. And now you can see what the results look like. And that is a real quick, easy way to create a paper sack.